We're going to talk this morning a little bit about sort of how do we think about next-gen financial services at Citi, and why we think that what all of you in this room are doing is so critical to what's happening not only in the Valley and in the US, but globally. And the way we think about this is, there's a lot of press that's been happening that says, the Valley has become way too inwardly focused. We are all about, new services for the elite, right? This is about, do you want your groceries delivered in a bag, chopped up but not cooked, put together but not heated, heated but in a box, right? And all of those kinds of options are really around a particular segment of people. And I think some of the advances in FinTech have been painted in the same brush of, these are new advances, new technologies that are really for the elite, people who've already got access to all sorts of financial services and all sorts of financial technologies. And of course, there's another narrative around FinTech that is, what's great about FinTech is that this is all about the unbanked and the underbanked, right? And this goes way back to M-Pesa, but frankly, you could think about this also from much newer services, whether it's Pay Near Me or Zoom, or companies who have enabled billions of dollars of transactions for folks who just don't have any access to credit, don't have any access to being able to buy a bus ticket because you can't walk up to someplace anymore with $10 of cash and get something in return. And I think, from our perspective, both of these narratives have truth to them, as most often narratives do, right? Where, there's a lot of innovation happening kind of at both ends of the curve, if you think about it. But what we are most excited about is we think that there's tremendous innovation that's not getting talked about quite as much that's at the middle of the curve. And this is where we really focus on what it is that everyone's doing in this room and beyond to think about democratizing access for the masses, right? Not just for people who are unbanked or underbanked, not just for people who already have financial advisors, but for the rest of us, right? How do we think about bringing these technologies and new services to bear for everyone? So we spent some time asking ourselves, so why this and why now, right? Because if you imagine, it's no surprise that financial services is a big part of the GDP. It's always been out there. So what is it that's happening that's sort of creating the energy around FinTech that you guys have even at 9 a.m. on a Thursday morning, right? Why is everybody here and sitting listening to this stuff now, where 5-10 years ago we probably wouldn't have had the same kind of enthusiasm? And from my perspective, there are three things that are happening here. One is, and this is going to maybe sound a little bit silly, but one is really around the influx of technology, right? So I think you have some early mover companies, whether it's PayPal, Braintree, Lending Club, others, who have proven that you can actually take technology and apply it in a highly regulated, sort of centuries-old established industry and make a difference and get to scale, right? That this wasn't about sort of niche opportunities, but this is actually a technology play. And I think until we had some players that really proved that out, there was a bit of reticence about, whether or not it was wise, frankly, as entrepreneurs and as investors to, put your bets on something that, seems so entrenched. I think the other piece of technology that we take for granted in so many other sectors, but that we don't often think about what a profound impact is having on FinTech is social. Right? I gave a speech a couple years ago where I said, people are willing to talk about and post about anything online except money. Right? People are willing to give the most intimate, lurid details of their life that I don't want to know anything about, but they're not willing to go online and say, should I ask my boss for a raise? Am I getting paid commensurate with what someone else is? Am I getting the best rate on my mortgage? Did I just make a really bad decision about my car loan? Because it feels very personal and it's very emotional. And so social and FinTech don't often get talked about together, but part of what's really interesting about technology and the impact on financial services is that social is starting to play a part. And you're starting to see companies who are tapping into the power of virality on the internet in a financial services context. So as an example, just think about Venmo, right? 16 times the volume over 2 years. And it's not as though you're seeing billboards and television ads, and right? This is all viral uptake. And I think it goes unsaid or undersaid how much of an impact that's having on the imagination and the ingenuity of people as they start to think about, well, gosh, if big players can take tech platforms and build at scale, and players can come in and take advantage of the virality of the internet and social networks. Those two things are powerful enough from a tech perspective to fuel a different kind of innovation in FinTech. In London, and I stopped in New York for a long meeting, and then I had another long flight. So much to the dismay of my team, we were debating back and forth online through much of that. Yes, there's capital availability, but there's always been capital availability. So why now, why in the last 2 years are we seeing tens of billions of dollars flow into this sector? And I think there are a couple of reasons for this. I mean, one is just the pure fact that what I just talked about, right? Firms have proven that success is possible, and nothing attracts venture capitalists like prior success and the feeling that, like, if they don't get into the next thing, they might miss it. But I think there's something else here around capital, which is the people who are starting to prove out the models in FinTech and where innovation can go are people who have come out in some ways of the crisis, right? A lot of people who've got deep knowledge, deep understanding of this sector, who have moved out of banking, who've moved out of sort of traditional FinTech jobs, and married with the capital that's available, have really started to push the envelope. The third thing I think is really important, and this too, I believe, has a lot of seeds from the most recent financial crisis, is the marriage of millennials. 3/4 of millennials, if you ask them, will tell you that they want to work with a company that's driving not just economic but also social value, right? 2/3 of millennials will choose where they work based on that. So if you think about this sort of last 5 to 7 years of technology being available and now put to use in this regulated industry, a very different view on capital availability and return, as well as talent, and a mindset around how do we bring to bear all of these capabilities to change a system that, whether we like the financial services system or we don't like it, in this planet at this moment, right, a lot depends on the ability to move money from one place to another, to buy something at a market, to pay your kids' college tuition. And so I think the marriage of tech, money, talent, desire for social impact is what's leading to a lot of great innovation. We talk about this all the time, as I said at the beginning, about, hello. Maybe it's just about social impact. Is there someone back there who can make this go one more? There we go. We talk about this, I said at the beginning, as democratization. So as we think about going into today and hearing from some great investors and some great entrepreneurs in the lineup that SV Forum has put together, I think it's critical to keep in mind, well, what is this democratization getting people, right? What's the end result? Why does anyone care about this? And we think there are 3 things that are happening here that are important. One is that data transparency is helping consumers. Across that whole curve of people, having transparency to your information, other people's information, is changing the game in financial services. So there are many examples of this. You can think just of a player like Credit Karma, right? Saying, it shouldn't just be the bureaus and this sort of technical way that you understand your credit score. Why can't we help the average person understand that? And by the way, why don't we make that free? Right? And Credit Karma hasn't just influenced their own customers, but really influenced the industry and nudged the industry toward providing better transparency about something that's a critical piece of information for managing your finances. And now we're back. The second thing is, we think that all the things I talked about before are bringing these new tools that are really increasing access. And that is important not just for the unbanked or the underbanked. It's important for everyone. And sometimes this can seem maybe smaller and not as important, like, oh, all they mean is just access on my telephone. But really what we're talking about here is access to technologies, to capital that up until this point would really have been reserved for a select few. So think about some of the players like Square and Funding Circle who are bringing to small businesses capabilities around data, around financing that previously were available. They were just only available if you were a Fortune 500 or Global 1000 firm, right? It's not as though the concepts didn't exist. It's that no one had applied that technology and the capital and the talent to figuring out how to efficiently distribute this to people who didn't need a bespoke solution. They just needed a solution. You're seeing the same thing happen in the consumer space where, it used to be that you could get great financial advice if you were at a thin sliver, at the kind of top of the heap. Now, using platform technology, you're seeing players like Betterment come in and say, now that we can apply all these tools, we can bring the best kind of advice to anyone at no minimum amount, right? So anyone can start to put money away. And I think that kind of access combined with transparency is important for improving the financial well-being of all of us. And finally, I think a critical piece that should not be underestimated is affordability. Again, we sometimes focus on affordability, whether we're talking about blockchain or M-Pesa, as we need to go to zero cost because that's what's going to bring in the people who don't have any access at all right now. The reality is affordability hits everyone. Whether you're a family outside of the U.S. is trying to pay your child's college tuition in the U.S. and you're realizing you're spending more in wire transfer fees and FX fees, and a company like Peer Transfer who's enabling all of that and making it easier for families to move money around the globe, or a company like Robinhood that's bringing the same kind of very inexpensive, free, commission-free trading that you would enjoy if you were an institutional trader to anyone who wants to trade. And I think part of the reason that we're so excited about the work and the ideas that are present in this room and beyond is because all of you are taking those tools that I talked about at the beginning, bringing transparency, bringing affordability, and really changing the amount of access that a whole broad swath of consumers and institutions have to FinTech. And we think that that's not only fascinating, interesting, a good thing to do for the world, but also makes great business sense. So I hope you have a great day here. SV Forum has put together an excellent lineup, and we're proud to be a part of what we think is an important revolution in the financial services space. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Do we have time for some questions?
Sure, I can stick around for a few minutes.
Yeah, that'll be great. So who wants to go first? Come on, you have a great opportunity here. Asking Citi Ventures.
Yeah.
Yep, we have one there.
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of the broad picture of what we look at, because I think it's important. I always say, no entrepreneur went into business to fundraise. So giving a little bit of kind of a picture of what we do, but then I'll talk specifically about FinTech. So at Citi Ventures, we do a lot of work in data and security, probably not surprising, commerce and payments, FinTech, and marketing. If I think about financial services right now, I think there's some things that are nascent technologies that are likely to have dramatic long-term impact, but that are still very early that we're experimenting with. So all of the work around blockchain, whether currency enabled or smart contracts or titles or that sort of thing, is something that as a company we're very interested in, because we think I always think of it as it's a little bit like TCP, years ago. Like, it's hard to even envision, if the technology bears out, how much change that will happen, how much change that will drive over the next couple of decades. Nearer in, we are very interested in marketplaces and tools that change who can participate, whether an individual customer, a client, an investor. So whether that's investments of ours like Betterment or just trying to think about how are we bringing in more people to the fold in an inexpensive way? So I think we think about that both on the tool side. So in the payment space, you might think about different applicability of the payments rails, as well as on the, how do people interact with payments? There have been some great companies that have realized that, if you're raising a child today, they don't have a lot of the same tools, tangible tools that they might have had 30 years ago. And what I mean by that is, when I was little, slightly more than 30 years ago, if you babysat or you mowed the lawn, you got a certain number of dollars. They went in your pocket. If you went to the mall, you knew you could either afford an Orange Julius or you couldn't, right? And even though money's always been intangible, people had a very tangible way of building foundational understanding of it. And that was really important as you grew up and then had to manage more than like $5 and a cookie. Today, a lot of these tools that are bringing access are also paradoxically making money that much more intangible, right? It's just a click, or it's not even a click. And so there are a lot of interesting companies that I think are growing up around what are the implicit things in the environment that have helped all of our generation to manage money and to make decisions, and how do we need to think about replicating that so that the next generation doesn't sort of all of a sudden find themselves in a place where because those tools were almost in the background, you didn't think about teaching your kid about $5 in their pocket, but it just kind of happened. I think there are a large number of companies from Level to LearnVest to others who are thinking deeply about what's going to be required, almost in an ambient sense, to help people to develop the tools and the intuition around managing their finances. So broad spectrum of stuff that we think about in terms of FinTech. I think mobile and apps are that. I mean, I think that, at this point, they're not everything, but if we're not thinking in a way that is mobile first and on your person, I come from a long history of, I believe that wearable computing, this is just going to become a part of who we all are. And to think that the only way that I manage my finances is by going home and filling out an electronic checkbook register, though I am kind of a geek and I do that. But to think that that's what most people are going to do is highly unlikely. And the way that we're all really going to manage this stuff is here. And it's harder because it's a little bit more transient. And so I think we are going to have people who are very thoughtful about how do you take something that's with you all the time, but doesn't have quite as much permanence in a funny way, and build that into something that needs a deep structure around it in order for you to be effective from a financial point of view.
So to take that, I guess this is on, right? Yeah. So to take that one step further, there's managing your finances for like the here and now, like how much money do I have in the bank? And then there's also managing for the future, like making investments for a savings account and stuff like that for the masses. Are you looking at any of that, personal investments?
I love that question, because part of the reason I stopped in New York yesterday was that exact debate. And I wish I had a snapshot of the piece of paper we were working on, which said like here and now, and because for many of us, and by the way, I would say, just like we talked about earlier, it's not just people who are living on the edge or people who have a lot of money to manage. For many of us, the reality is that even though we have all good intentions about the future, money is mostly about, do I have cash flow for today? Can I pay my bills? Can I pay my rent? And then it's kind of only all of a sudden later that you think, gee, if I'd been paying attention to those ads that say, what's your retirement number, then maybe I would have been thinking about this. And so we are, part of this notion of building the tools, the accessibility for people is not just about how do I manage for today, but what are my goals? What am I trying to achieve? And it's not just retirement, right? What are, do I want to send my kids to college? Do I want to go on a particular trip? And I would say, in some ways, managing money is a little bit like exercise and dieting. Like, it's a great thing to do. It's just that it takes a certain discipline. You don't want to have to do it every day. Some days you just want to eat a cookie. And so trying to figure out how do we help people, not in a, overbearing way, but in a way that helps connect the here and now to what's happening later. It's part of the reason that we're so excited about Betterment, which is to us it kind of straddles, you don't have to spend your time thinking about, okay, what do I need to do for tax loss harvesting? Is this, have I done that right or not? You can sort of in a relatively straightforward and seamless here and now mindset be putting money away and thinking about, okay, I've got that a little bit taken care of and I can move on. But I think both are important, and it's part of why we're excited about the variety of kind of, ingenuity and invention that's coming into the sector, because it's complicated. It touches a lot of pieces of everyone's lives, and having people thinking about all the different pieces of that is really important.
All right, we have one.
These are industries that have been regulated for, in some instances, over 100 years. Do you think entrepreneurs or innovators in this space understand the role that they need to give to the regulatory environment? And when you're assessing investments, is that a key Achilles heel or a risk factor that you look at?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I mean, obviously, regulation is really important in this environment. And the level of regulation varies from, large multinational bank like a global bank like Citi to a small startup who's trying to do, something in a particular region. And we're seeing a lot of evolution of that regulation, which makes it even more complex. What I would say is, like any sector in the world of startups, there is a wide variety of approach from an entrepreneur point of view, right? Some entrepreneurs are a little bit more on the devil may care side of, we just want to disrupt this and we'll deal with the regulators, maybe later, maybe never. There's at the other side of the spectrum, there are many entrepreneurs who have come out of financial services, which I think is really exciting, who deeply understand what the regulators are trying to accomplish and are incredibly savvy about how they want to interface with those regulators. And then there's a spectrum in between. We think this is important not only as we make investment decisions. Obviously, we are highly regulated, and so we look for companies that are probably more on the attentive to and careful about the regulatory space, because it's important for the compliance and regulatory issues that we deal with. But I think it's important as a sector to have a broad spectrum, because the regulators are learning just as all of us are learning. And what we're seeing is that, and you've seen this in other sectors as well, whether you think about the taxi sector, the hotel sector, where when you can provide great services for clients and customers, and you can prove out that these services are value add, they're improving, what people are trying to get done, that the regulators are quite, interested in understanding that. And so we think that this sort of wide variety of people who are helping to propel financial services forward not only exists within the regulatory framework that we have today, but is helping all of us as we think about how that regulatory framework should evolve going forward. From a pure investment point of view, we obviously, comply with everything that we need to from a regulatory point of view. And from a ecosystem point of view, we're very supportive of the fact that we know these startups aren't as highly regulated as we are. That's okay. That innovation happens at the fringe, right? It's going to happen outside, where you've got companies that don't have all the constraints, entrepreneurs who aren't thinking in the same box. And then over time, we're going to work together. It's part of why we're so excited about partnering with this community, because over time you work together and you figure out, where do you need to fit into the existing framework, and where there are places to push that forward.